What's up, guys? My name is CJ with Dad's XP, and today we're going to be looking at the masterpiece that is Baldur's Gate 3. Now, if you guys like this review, make sure to drop us a sub and a like, as it really helps us out. We fund these games ourselves, and as dads, it can be tough to find the time to do these reviews, so we really appreciate all the support. And if there's a game coming out that you want us to review, let us know in the comments. If it's been out for a while, we can still take a look at it. Baldur's Gate 3 being a great example. This game's been out for a little while already, and unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably already heard about it. But we wanted to talk about it anyways, with the end of the year coming up, and Baldur's Gate 3 being one of the most likely contenders for winning Game of the Year, which might sound a little bit presumptuous to some people, but given the meteoric rise of Baldur's Gate 3, I feel like it's a pretty safe bet. Now, the astute of you may have already noticed that I referred to this game as a masterpiece, but before we get into how I feel about it, let's go ahead and give you a little brief rundown of what Baldur's Gate 3 is for the people who haven't heard about it. Baldur's Gate 3 is a story-rich RPG set in the Dungeons & Dragons universe, where choices have real consequences akin to BioWare classics like Knights of the Old Republic and Mass Effect. The gameplay is fundamentally built around the 5e Dungeons & Dragons rule set, and if that's your kind of jam, then this is a game that I think you'll really like. If you've never played a Dungeons & Dragons game before, I highly encourage you to not let that fact deter you from playing this game. Going into this game, I didn't have any experience with D&D, but since having played it, I've done a bit of D&D outside of this game, and I will say a lot of the information is transferable if you were curious. And with all that being said, let's go ahead and break down the behemoth that is Baldur's Gate 3. And as a side note, for the remainder of the review, I'll be using D&D instead of Dungeons & Dragons, as I've been tongue-tied 1,000 times trying to record this. So I think first and foremost, one of the things that I want to talk about right off the bat is the story for this game. Now, even though this is Baldur's Gate 3, you don't need to have played Baldur's Gate 1 or 2 in order to play this. Now, if you have played those games, there will be some relevant information and some things that will carry over that you might notice, but nothing too major. The story for this game might not be necessarily what's on people's radar when they're thinking about Baldur's Gate 3, but I think it's easily the best part of the game, maybe next to the combat. The story in Baldur's Gate 3 really just starts you off right away. You end up on a Mind Flayer ship, and you're immediately infected with a brain parasite that, if you're not able to remove it, will turn you into a Mind Flayer. Now, really quick, since we're going over story, there won't be any spoilers in this. I'm not going to talk about anything that you're not going to find out about within the first, hour of the game. So moving on from there, you're sort of like, your character is in a position where you know basically as much as your character knows at that point in time. So what that allows is for you to sort of become your character in the sense that you know as much as they do, and you're immediately sort of like drawn to your character as like, okay, this is my representation in this world, because they don't know what's happening, I don't know what's happening, and we just got to figure it out. As you progress through the first hour or so of the game, you'll quickly amass a bunch of companions. Now, that's not to say there's not plenty of companions for you later in the game, but you will get a large majority of them right away. The story in this game is really what you make it. You have a lot of options in terms of how you want to approach certain situations, or lack thereof, meaning like, you can choose to completely ignore some situations, and outcomes can be completely different if you choose not to engage with them at all instead of choosing one side or the other. And people who have played this game will know that in Act 1, that can happen almost right away, which I think is really cool, because I feel like some games tend to hold on to those big changes or big choices until later in the game, whereas Baldur's Gate is not afraid to let you make the wrong choice, or not necessarily the wrong choice, but a choice with severe outcomes really early on, which ends up making the world feel much more alive. Now, who you choose to bring along with you on your journey does have serious consequences to the story, and what I mean by that is like, certain characters have certain affiliations with certain factions, or they know certain people, and each and every one of them has their own questline. In fact, this game even allows you to play as one of those companions if you so choose. While you can do that, I would highly recommend that you don't, because I think making your own character and sort of carving your own path in the story is far more enjoyable, and you can still enjoy the story of all the companions at the same time. When we talk about companion quest lines, and we talk about the fact that this game allows you to make serious choices, we can't avoid the topic of companion loss. What I mean by that is essentially, some companions, they have their own motivations, they have their own beliefs, and they're not always going to align with the playstyle that you have in mind for your character. And so what that can mean is sometimes your companions can die, and I mean die permanently. They can leave you based on your choices. Now, this also goes the other way as well. If you're on the same side of things, your relationship can become better. You can have romantic relationships with your companions. Cut to the meme of the bear. Uh, but basically, with all that being said, the story for this game is absolutely phenomenal. I don't want to get into like too much like fine detail about it because I think it's just one of those things that you just have to play. All right, let's go ahead and talk about the graphics of this game. I don't really think that there needs to be a ton of things said about this. You guys have been watching some of the gameplay that I provided up until this point. The game is beautiful. That being said, I am playing on PC. I am playing in 4K. I am playing with a high-end gaming computer. So, as with all PC things, your mileage may vary. On console, I can't speak to the performance of this game, honestly, as far as like graphical fidelity and things like that. I would imagine that it's probably good. I haven't heard any complaints, but I can't speak to it personally. Now, I think when you talk about the graphics for this game, they're obviously incredibly, incredibly beautiful. The environments are very detailed. They're varied, which is really nice because games like this, in a game that's this long, you need to have stuff that looks different. It sucks playing a game that looks the same the whole way through. Now, that being said, you do get stuck in some areas for quite a long time, and you could get bored of the environment, although with how good they look, I don't feel like it really detracts from the game at all. But yeah, outside of that, I don't really think there's anything worth, delving into too much. I think there's other parts of this game that I'd rather talk about a lot more. I think, you could see by looking at it, the game is absolutely outstanding looking. And I think that's all that really needs to be said about graphics. All right, now that we've talked about graphics, I want to talk about the sound for this game. Larian Studios, in my opinion, is a masterclass in how video game music should be done. And, in reality for mostly everything that they do, but that's beside the point. I think, you know what, just hit them with that main menu music real quick. Yeah, I mean, if you don't like that, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, it's just incredible. It's so good. The sound design of the game is fantastic. The atmosphere, the ambiance that they build when you're underground or in the forest or things like that, it's just so supremely well done. And the music is absolutely beautiful. I think for us dads who are a little bit older, we all have a game in our memory that the music of that game is intrinsically tied to that memory. And the nostalgia that you feel for that game and the love that you have for it, that music is always such a monumental part of it. For me, that game's Final Fantasy X. I'm sure for some of you it's Final Fantasy VII. It's Donkey Kong Country. All those games that just have such incredible music. I feel like this game has that. It has that music that when you hear it, it just, sends a shiver up your spine. It's just so excellently done. And I think that's all I can really say about it. I mean, it is just so incredible. Now we can talk about the part that I've been most excited to talk about: the gameplay, the controls, mostly the gameplay. But we'll go. Let's go over the controls real quick. So, mouse and keyboard for this game feels good. It has a very similar UI system to an MMO, is what I would probably compare it to the easiest. And when I say that, I just mostly mean because the base layout for your abilities and whatnot is very akin to an MMO action bar, which is not to detract from it at all. I think it works well for the game. It can be kind of hard to sort of manage all those skills sometimes, but I think that's kind of a minor slight and something that they have actually made changes to since the game has come out. Another gripe you might have with this game as far as controls go is the camera can be kind of frustrating at times. For the most part, I feel like it's okay, but there are times because of a sort of isometric view, you may have a hard time seeing some things, but once you get used to using the controls and, assuming it's not your first time playing a game on mouse and keyboard, I think you'll be okay. Now, onto gameplay specifically. I think the most important thing that we're going to talk about is the combat, as it's such a major feature in this game. And the way combat works, if any of you have ever played maybe Dragon Age, not necessarily the newest one, but the previous, like the original Dragon Age Origins, things like that, it sort of plays like that. If you played any of Larian Studios' previous games like Divinity, Original Sin 1 or 2, those games also phenomenal. The combat system works a lot like that. It's going to be based on D&D's 5e rule set, like I had mentioned previously in the video. So you've got your wizard, you have your druid, you have your paladin, you have, your cleric, things like that. All of these things, all these classes tie into how you play the game as well, because being a certain class gives you more dialogue options, it gives you more clout with some of the factions. It also has implications as far as, like, if you're a paladin, you have to devote yourself to a certain oath. If you break that oath, you lose your paladin powers. Now, there are ways to get it back, and there is maybe even a special class that you can get by breaking your oath, and things like that, to me, are just so insanely cool. The combat in this game rewards strategic gameplay as well as good planning. I mean, when you go into an encounter, you don't necessarily want to waste all of your abilities right off the bat. A lot of the times you're going to want to line up enemies, to get the most bang for your buck, so to speak. You don't want to just go charging in head first and, never thinking preemptively about, like, how you're going to approach a situation, because it's a good way to end up dead. As far as difficulty goes, this game can be as easy or as hard as you want it to be. It does have settings. There are mods out there to allow you to make it even harder or even easier if you want that. I think overall the combat in this game is so incredibly fun. If you're a fan of, like, a tactic style of gameplay, or you like turn-based combat, which this game technically is, I think you're really going to enjoy Baldur's Gate 3. Just all these little intricacies that the game has just makes it feel so rich and deep, because they put so much time and effort into making every interaction feel so authentic. There are things that you can interact with in this game that don't even have any right to even be there. And what I mean by that is, like, in the very beginning of the game, there's a little squirrel that you can talk to. And when I say talk to, I mean if you have the ability to speak to animals, because some characters and classes do, you can talk to the squirrel. And he's going to tell you how, it's something about his gold coin. And if you take that coin and then you talk to him again, he'll notice that it's gone and he'll react to it. But the cool thing about it is, if you put the coin back, and I mean go into your bag and just toss it on the ground, but you put it back into his little nest, he reacts to it. The game has no right to even have, like, it's just such a small thing, but it just shows the level of detail that they go through, because chances are you might not even have a person in your party who can speak to animals. So that's there as, like, this little nugget where if you have the ability to engage with that situation, then you get to see all the fine detail they put into it, and those kinds of things are spread through the entire game. I cannot emphasize enough how much work and time is seemingly put into just adding so much little detail to everything in a way that makes the game feel so alive and real, that it just so strongly just oozes realism and makes you feel so, like, entranced in the world that they've created. Like Larian Studios' previous works, the environment plays a huge factor in the game, not only in combat, but exploration, and in some aspects, even questing. What I mean by that is, if you were to get into a fight and there's a big pool of oil and you shoot a fireball and it hits the ground, or it lights a character on fire who's standing in that oil catches fire and spreads everywhere. Another way they use this to their advantage is sometimes when you're trying to get through an area, you might be blocked by, like, say, a giant boulder. Now, you could sit there and bash it with a sword, but let's be honest, a sword's not going to do much to a boulder, but a hammer, that will do the trick. So things like that, where they put the detail in, it's like, yeah, plenty of games have walls that you can break and things like that, but the fact that depending on what the object is that you're trying to break through is made of depends and changes how you approach every situation, because sometimes you just don't have blunt weapons, or a strong enough fire attack, or a strong enough lightning attack. There's plenty of ways that they use this to help you, in a way, it sort of inspire you to diversify your moveset, your tools. Because essentially your spells become your tools on how you can progress certain situations, from combat to questing to exploration, all those things. Your spell kit is absolutely fundamental to your progression. Now, speaking of toolkit, one of the biggest tools in your arsenal when you play through this game is your charisma skill. Now, there's plenty of other skills that you can put points into that do various different things, but your charisma skill is one of those things where you can literally talk a boss into defeating themselves. And I mean that it's not just a one-off instance. There are plenty of bosses that you can essentially talk them to death. And not not in a way where you're just shouting at them like you're the Dovahkiin, but more so, convince them that you're not worth the trouble, or that, you're not to be trifled with, things like that. Which I think is really cool, because sometimes you either talk yourself out of some nasty situations, or you end up doing the opposite of that. At the end of the day, I could go on and on and on about all the cool gameplay features that this game has, but we simply just don't have time to do all of them. All I can say is, if you have any even mild interest in playing this game, absolutely play it. Last and certainly not least, before we get into our final score for this game, let's talk about replayability. Now, as dads, we don't always have as much time to game as we'd like, but I think with Baldur's Gate 3, you could probably make an exception. This game is incredibly long. It can be incredibly short if you want it to be. Even then, you're still probably pushing 30, 40 hours if I'm being honest. At most, you're pushing 200 plus hours easily. You could do this game in 100 hours and feel like you've seen a very good chunk of the game. Because of the way that they set up the class system and the way that you can approach the stories and quests in this game, I would say this game has an insane amount of replayability. There's so many different ways you could approach this game. Every single time that you play it, it can be different. When you play with other people, it can be different. That's one of the things I didn't even get to mention in this review, is that you can play this with 3 other friends, or if you get a mod, you can play with even more than that. This game has so much to offer, and even if you don't have a lot of time, I can confidently say that if you have to spend your hard-earned money on a game, and you want to get your money's worth out of it, Baldur's Gate 3 is absolutely worth a full price tag game. 100% unequivocally. It is a masterpiece of a game. With that being said, my final score for Baldur's Gate 3 is an absolute 10 out of 10. This game is phenomenal. It's outstanding. It's one of the best games that's been made in the last decade. And honestly, every developer that's even out there right now should be shaking in their boots, because this game is probably going to ruin some video games for you because they're just not going to hold up in comparison. So if you're asking yourself, should a dad play? Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for watching this review. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Doing these reviews has been a lot of fun, but it comes at a cost for all the dads here at Dads XP. So please, if you like this review, leave us a comment, leave us a like, and subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. And if you got a game that you want us to review in the future, let us know down below in the comments. I'm CJ, and this has been Dads XP. Have a good one.